government or its agencies to prevent the plane from taking off. Will the Prime Minister commit to informing the House at the earliest opportunity who was travelling on that flight, why, despite being informed in advance of the flight, was no attempt made by the UK government to keep the plane on the ground, and what will the Prime Minister personally do to try and prevent any similar breaches of sanctions from happening in the future?
I thank him very much. I'll make sure that as soon as we can get some, I don't know the answer to his question, but as soon as we can get some information about that, Mr. Speaker, I'll make sure the House is properly informed.
Andy Carter.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this week, the Planning Inspectorate waved through a decision by Labour councillors to build a massive logistics hub in South Warrington. The plans are contrary to national policy, entirely in the Greenbelt, and have been approved despite more than 1,000 letters of objection. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that listening to local communities and protecting our precious Greenbelt must be at the heart of planning policy? And will he meet with me to see how local residents can have their voices heard?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, local residents could have no more powerful voice than that of my honourable friend. The House will have heard him loud and clear. I know the Ministry Department of Levelling Up will have heard him loud and clear. I will make sure that he gets the relevant meeting.
And the Bada.
No bullying and no harassment, no leaking, no misuse of taxpayers' money, and no actual or perceived conflicts of interest. The precious principles of public life enshrined in this document must be honoured at all time. Those, Mr. Speaker, are the Prime Minister's own words from the Ministerial Code. So can the Prime Minister tell me, on a scale of 1 to 10, how's he doing with keeping to those principles?
Mr. Speaker, I think 10 out of 10, Mr. Speaker, because what we believe in this government in adhering to the principles of the Ministerial Code, and by the way, it's an important point because, Mr. Speaker, there's a lot of attacks on MPs, on what goes on in this place, and I think it is always worth stressing that the vast majority of people who work in the House of Commons, members of Parliament, are doing a very good job and working very hard and are not misbehaving.
Final question, Kevin Hollinray.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thurska Molson has welcomed asylum seekers from all parts of the world, including Syria and the Ukraine. But the government's plans just announced from the 31st of May to the start of what will be up to 1,500 non-detained, young, single males from different parts of the world, asylum seekers, on a base that will be the centre of a small rural village of 600 people, children, all the way through to elderly residents. That village without streetlights, without police presence. It will devastate the community. It will devastate house prices, which will plummet, and the residents of that village will not feel safe to leave their homes alone. Will my right honourable friend please, on behalf of the community, please stop these plans?
Prime Minister.
I thank him very much, and I know that my right honourable friend, the Home Secretary, is engaging with him and with others locally about the use of the site, and I hear loud and clear what he's had to say. Indeed, I'm the recipient of many of his intercessions on this matter, and I understand the strength of feeling in his constituency, and I'm sure that there will be further meetings between him and the Home Office about what we can do.
That ends questions. We're going to let it clear while.
Well, Prime Minister's questions, as expected, the Labour Party are going in quite hard on the cost of living crisis. Let's bring in our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, joining us live now from Westminster. Didn't really manage to extract a great deal out of the Prime Minister, though, did they?
No, it wasn't one of those Prime Minister's questions that particularly moved us on. The Prime Minister was under pressure from Keir Starmer to introduce a windfall tax. There was some language earlier on in those exchanges that suggested that Boris Johnson was leaving it open. Keir Starmer said, "You're going to do a U-turn, aren't you?" Boris Johnson did toughen his language, his critique of windfall taxes later in his exchanges with Keir Starmer, but at no point did he rule it out. The thrust, as we were saying beforehand, of this Prime Minister's questions inevitably going to be about the cost of living after the 9% inflation hike, inflation figures that we got this morning, and the challenge of the cost of living that, as many MPs stood up and said, is dominating constituents' lives at the moment. To be honest, Jane, the most interesting bit of Prime Minister's questions was the SNP question towards the end, where they raised the rather intriguing subject of a flight on the 26th of February of this year, which was a few days after the ban on Russian flights going to the planes going to Russia. And Boris Johnson was challenged over what exactly happened when a small Estonian private jet took off, apparently with the authorisation of Transport Secretary Grant Shapps, something that's subsequently been denied. Why did a sanction-busting plane leave Inverness Airport and head to Russia just after the ban on flights went ahead? That was something that was put in the in-tray of the Prime Minister. He promised to find out more about it, but expect to hear a bit more about that rather unusual story being pursued by the local paper up there, the Press and Journal. But that was probably the most exciting moment of otherwise a Prime Minister's questions that we pretty much pre-scripted in advance.
OK, Sam, thanks very much. Well, as we've been hearing, small businesses can find it particularly hard to cope with rising bills. Already hit by the pandemic, they're now struggling to stay afloat as prices keep rising and profits dwindle. Sky's Katerina Vitozzi has been talking to a gym owner in Wigan.
Hello? Can you see the duckies? We didn't grow up very well off, and I was very aware growing up that we didn't have a lot. I always didn't want my children to feel that. I never wanted them to do without it. I never wanted them to feel embarrassed because of the clothes they were wearing and stuff. So I guess that's what motivates me. I can't let them down. Got rings swinging into us, Daisy.
Nick Priestley has poured everything into his own gym company. It just made it through COVID lockdowns. He doesn't know if it'll survive what's coming next.
Just